Lucy did not look up. Oh, wait. The table was in the far corner, lodged in the shag pile of the hotel's main dining room. Hallam noticed that things were going from bad to worse by the time the food was ordered. Verity, in the presence of Julius, was making her usual effort to be charitable-minded, which she enlivened with the occasional sparkle of claws. The cocktails, too, had helped to make the atmosphere relaxed and enjoyable, but the stress of it all was beginning to show on Lucy. She sat to the right of Hallam, her face sardonic mask that could not, however, disguise a crawling sense of compromise. Hallam, meanwhile, had been displaying his perhaps surprising facility for diverting prattle. He could hardly stop himself, despite the censure he sensed coming from Lucy. Panicking slightly only seemed to make it worse. He mentally blamed it on the spliff. After a selected update on village affairs, Hallam was discoursing on the rumored decadence of the local bell-ringing society. Beer cans had been discovered in the apse. There was also its association with the new female vicar, who was widely suspected of being lesbian. "Hallam, where do you get all this fabulous material?" asked Verity. "Carl, mainly," he lied. He tried to gather his own intelligence whenever possible. "You'd make a tremendous spy," she said. "Daniel Defoe's bloodline runs true, it seems." Hallam smiled unevenly and took a sip of his wine. Verity kept her gaze on him, the blue eyes bright with assessment, the smile as ever affectionate. She put the final touches to the small mound of pâté that she had arranged on a piece of toast, and bit it off cleanly, her teeth making a perfect indented crescent in the triangle. She chewed several times. Then, as she eased the modest mouthful down, something horrible happened. The soft, unlined throat of hers puckered strangely under her brooch's deep blue ribbon, and Hallam could quite clearly make out the grisly mechanics of her swallowing action. It made him think of a lizard, and the disruption to her beauty, however fleeting, came as a small but shocking moment of enlightenment, as if he had discovered Dorian Gray-like, where she paid for her beauty. He was amazed he had never noticed it before. "Julius," Verity said, as if nothing had happened, "have you spoken to Carl about pulling up that rose bed? It's playing havoc with my allergy, and I must have asked him 1,000 times. Hallam willed himself to stare at her throat and drew his mind back to the conversation. He knew that Carl was opposed to the destruction of the roses on a matter of principle. He had put hundreds of hours into that rosebed during his apprenticeship, and Hallam added to the wordless opposition, as he did to any plans that had altered the old grounds. Although nothing specific had been mentioned, the front acres were clearly marked down for an assault, once the interior of the hall had been refurbished. "I want old Mr. Hennessy back," continued Verity, referring to Carl's father. "I didn't realize gardeners retired. I imagined them slowly turning into compost." "I think he wanted to give his son a chance," observed Julius. "Is that natural? How sweet." "Old Mr. Hennessy," said Lucy with undisguised relish, "was a pervert." Verity bit her lip with mock excitement. "Now that sounds controversial, Lucy. What do you mean? Do you know what he did his last week? I was coming up the drive, and he was over by the shrubbery, and he shouted out, 'Look what I found, Lucy, a newborn.' I thought, 'Oh dear, what's he got, a half-dead blackbird chick?' So I went over, all on its own it was," he said, with his hands cupped in front of him. When he opened them, what was it? Old Mr. Hennessy's. That he squeezed the mushroom bit, and his eye opened and closed like some revolting imitation of a hungry beak. Hallam raised his eyebrows and took a sip of champagne. He found Mr. Hennessy's actions distasteful, certainly. Personally, he couldn't think of anything that would give him less pleasure than exposing himself to a young woman. Julius was shocked enough to stop shoveling prawn cocktail. "Mr. Hennessy did that? Do you think I should get some therapy?" "Why didn't you tell me?" Lucy shrugged. "Trauma, probably. Mom always said he was creepy. Anyway, too late now. He's dead, isn't he?" "He's in a nursing home." Hallam noted the mention of their mother, a sure sign that stakes being raised. Julius attempted to take another bite of prawn cocktail, only to abandon it. He put the spoon down on the saucer and wiped his mouth. "What inspired that little revelation?" asked Verity. Lucy looked mildly perplexed. Verity laughed. "Your father did have a mouthful of seafood, you know." "I'm sorry, Verity. I'll keep any rape attempts to myself in the future." "Don't be silly, Lucy," said Julius. "I'm just amazed you didn't tell us before." "Poor man," said Verity, sighing. Perhaps he got the wrong impression. Julius straightened his napkin. Lucy scowled. So you want to know the purpose of my story? I wonder what the main course will be like, Julius speculated with quiet desperation. It goes to show, Lucy continued, that you, Julius, are blind to certain things that are going on in the hall. We must all be on our guard, said Verity archly. Hallam felt a strong urge to leave the table. He put down his napkin and stood up. Where are you going? Asked Lucy, making it clear that she expected his support, but Hallam wasn't interested. He was the one who would have to live with the fallout from this, not her. I am going to relieve myself, he informed the table, then inclined his head smartly and headed out. Hallam intended to get some fresh air. The joint they had smoked earlier had made him feel slightly sick. Preferring to steer clear of the busy street at the front, he found a fire exit ajar at the back of the hotel lobby, which opened onto a small yard next to the car park entrance. Across the yard he saw another door flanked by wheelie bins, which led, he guessed from the smell, to the kitchens. A metal ladder led up the brick wall to the hotel roof. The ladder inspired in Hallam a sudden longing for height. Glancing quickly around him, there was no one about. He obeyed the impulse, strolled over to the ladder's base, and then quickly clambered up. Each rasp of shoe sole on rung was a rising note of exhilaration. He was climbing out of confusion. His face was open and smiling when he hopped onto the roof 3 stories up. He looked around him past the service lift and ventilator shaft at the world below. He stepped softly over the bird-crap-spattered roof and surveyed the city that was around him. The streets were cooling and quieting under the evening sky. He breathed deep and luxuriated in the horizon's deepening colors. He knew this time was restricted to a few minutes, and this gave the moment a sweet poignancy. It was abruptly broken by the clatter of the service lift going up. Out of it stepped a kitchen porter on his break, lighting a cigarette. A puff of smoke rose from his cupped hands, slipped away, and then he looked up and saw Hallam. A gust of wind brushed the hair, which looked sweaty from the kitchens, and Hallam saw his face in full. He was the one from the street, the one with the gap in his teeth. The young man recognized Hallam immediately. Then he looked thoughtfully over Hallam's shoulder to the horizon. Hallam turned and looked too. It was turning peak. A brief silence. He heard the young man cough and stroll up. They stood side by side, a few feet away, and shared the horizon. The young man offered Hallam a cigarette from his pocket. Hallam smiled and shook his head. He contemplated saying something and decided against it. "She's a wanker," said the young man simply. Hallam nodded as if he didn't have an opinion on the matter, but would take his word for it. Not feeling the need to communicate further, they both returned to making use of the observatory. The sky looked all the more beautiful. Hallam was struck by a sentimental sense of comradeship with the young man. He smiled to himself with pleasure that was almost conceited. Only a roof could bring this kind of reconciliation, he thought, free from the various stupidities of existence on the ground below. He now recognized the young man as one of his kind, another voiceless dissenter, the one who always hung back. His earlier reluctance to intervene when Hallam got punched was thus entirely understandable and forgivable. Hallam even felt gratitude now for the little leave-it-see comment he had heard him say before the swing came. Hallam breathed deeply again. Could it ever be possible, he thought, for a life to be conducted entirely free of association for the ground? Imagining such a state was a regular daydream of his, and one that had always suffused with solitary romance, but now this horizon filled him with a drowsy sense of possibility. Perhaps in his dreams, at least, he did not necessarily have to be alone. But then he harshly dismissed the last thought as weakness. He looked at his watch and realized he had to go. Noiselessly he returned to the head of the ladder, and only paused to regard the porter's back in silhouette, caught briefly against the red sky. "Ah, here he is," said Verity, as Hallam slipped back into his chair, eyes down. "We're not going to bother with a naff toast, but it might be fun to explain why we chose this venue tonight." "Certainly not the food," muttered Lucy, and Verity chuckled. It seemed that Lucy no longer had the power to irritate. Lucy reached for the glass. "Go on then," she sighed. "I shall, because while it is 4 years to the day since Julius and I got married, this restaurant has a significance all its own. It was where Julius first proposed that I became partner in the firm. I was just his accountant at the time, and he couldn't believe it when I said no." Verity smiled at her husband mischievously. Julius bobbed his eyebrows and embarked on his main course. Lucy took it in politely, large mouthful of costly chablis. Hallam grunted. "Isn't this the moment then, Julius?" She prompted him gently. Julius looked up open-mouthed. His mind must have been somewhere else entirely, up a buttress perhaps, or down a foundation. "The little proclamation. Oh, yes," Julius swallowed. Verity's going to become a partner in the firm. We agreed it this afternoon." Lucy looked utterly crushed. Hallam, while he was not exactly interested in business matters, understood the significance of this. Now every single aspect of their father's life was subject to her influence and power. Even Verity seemed slightly unsettled by the silence. "So," she said, "it's all come full circle, as chance would have it." Hallam's heart began to beat a little faster. He straightened up. "When did Julius first offer you the partnership exactly?" he asked, as offhand as a manner he could. He had asked the question to which he knew the answer. It was when his mother was in the city psychiatric hospital, and shortly to kill herself, just as Julius's affair with Verity was getting under way. "Well, Hallam, let me see," she said, appearing to think. During the pause, Hallam glanced over to Lucy, who was waiting with similar attention to Verity's response. Those few moments on the roof had boosted Hallam's self-confidence to the point of recklessness. He wanted to establish whether it was possible for Verity to display any symptoms of conscience. He wanted to demonstrate to Lucy that he had not completely caved in. Verity knew the question was a challenge, but it seemed to be no problem at all. She looked at Hallam straight in the eye. "It wasn't long before your mother passed away, because I remember a few months later I had to come back from my break and help out Lucy here. The business needed someone to take care of it for a while." She paused here tactfully, while everyone sorted themselves out. Hallam loathed the way Verity used that term, "passed away," with all its pious delicacy, and the term "your mother," as if their mother hadn't also been Julius's wife, and yet almost enjoyed these sensations of disgust, and only partly because he wanted his father to witness the depthless insincerity of his wife was capable of. It was probably a wasted effort in that respect anyway. Verity continued smoothly. "And do you know, the funny thing was, that evening someone else rang me up. Randall, his name was. Dear old Randall," muttered Julius. Verity laughed again. "Yes, dear Randall. He had a soft spot for me, and absolutely insisted on taking me out to dinner that very night, and guess what? He took me to the same bloody restaurant. I can't think what the staff thought, me coming here with two different men on the same day. They probably thought you were a whore," laughed Hallam. And then he thought, who said that? Lucy coughed, put a napkin to her mouth, and kept it there. Hallam realized that he had gone too far. The spliff, the height. Verity turned her head slowly and looked at him. Her eyes did not narrow when she became angry. They widened, seeming to accentuate the tightness of the white skin between. Her shoulders hiked a few millimeters. Hallam found himself panicking, preparing for all sorts of possibilities. A wineglass on the head, cursings, a scene. In the past he would have found all these things impossible to imagine Verity instigating, but now some hormonal flare seemed to have wafted across the table, which communicated a degree of anger that went beyond indignation or outrage into the realm of the animal, utterly contradicting her posture, her artful composure. Hallam realized that the muscles along his back were painfully tensed. How could he have said it? The second passed and nothing happened, or rather something did happen, but it was a change that Hallam could not identify exactly. Verity was now merely looking at him thoughtfully. Julius shot Hallam a glance that was now from under his eyebrows, and then shot another toward his wife. Verity smiled at last. Relief began to seep over Hallam. Had he escaped? Verity's smile did contain mild reproach, but it was a smile, and that was the important thing. Then she began to laugh. Now that was slightly worrying, even though a helpless grin crept up on Hallam's lips too. And further disturbing development, Verity continued to laugh long enough for Lucy to feel that she could take away the napkin from her face and openly chortle along. Eventually, even Julius smiled, albeit faintly and briefly. Hallam could still feel Verity's eyes on him. None of the laughter was pleasant. He looked down at his watch in the hope that Dorwald and inconsequential behavior would somehow restore order. It was 8:11. In a superficial way, everything did fall back into normal patterns. The rest of dinner dragged on in a reassuringly dull way after that, and Lucy's expressions of impatience eventually got to the point where she emptied another glass of wine and said, "I'm meeting some friends in half an hour. Is that all right?" Verity sipped her coffee and looked at Julius. "Shall we let them go, Julius?" "Go on," he said, puffing on his cigar. "Enjoy yourselves." Hallam rose and opened his mouth hesitantly, wondering whether he should apologize. He looked at Verity, but she smiled at him forgivingly and wafted him away. "Thanks for dinner," he said to both of them, and then he added, for safety's sake, "Happy anniversary." "Come on, Hallam," said Lucy briskly. "Don't forget your present." Lucy and Hallam walked out together into the warm summer night, gifts in hand. Soon they were motoring out of and going down an underpass through the unreality of fluorescent orange. Lucy was normally a fast driver, but she steered with the straighter than necessary arms and square shoulders of a car lover. but neither of them were in a hurry to get back, and compared to the dry bend, the backbeat from the air vents was slower and more deliberate. Lucy shook her head and grinned wickedly at him. I liked the comment, she said. I could hardly control myself. The effect of her smile was not comforting. They were now leaving the city limits, and her face was greenly lit by the dashboard consoles. You could have been a bit more subtle. I thought she was going to kill me for a moment. What was I meant to do? A smirk was all it required. She shrugged and went down into Forth. The main road pushed on ahead, over flat fields and among electricity pylons until it peeled off and began to follow the signs for the village. The land started to bank and roll, while ahead the road wound on past thickly grassed paddocks and grey spinneys. On the right, a low hill shaped the sky. I think she's got it in for me, said Hallam, doom-laden. What nonsense! I thought you judged it rather well. Mind you, if I'd said it, there would have been hell to play. Lucy glanced over at him and grinned again. She had to dig deep to see the funny side, though, didn't she? I'm meeting the girls in the pub at Langton if you went home. No thanks, just drop me at the turnoff. Are you sure this is Cold Satchfield? It will take you ages to walk to Chanby from here. Hallam smiled. Certain. I'll see you tomorrow. Lucy shrugged and pulled in at Cold Satchfield Junction. She was used to his eccentricities. Hallam stepped out and waved her off from the pavement, then began to walk away from the village lights on the road for Chanby. It took him another hour to reach the village. He went past the local pub, the Pinkerton Arms, which was emptying slowly. A pickup emerged from the car park, and the beams of its headlights swung across Hallam's legs before heading uphill towards the housing estate. He crossed the road, leaving behind the boozy sounds of the bar, and soon he could make out the tall shadow that was Lower Point to the right. Gatewatch loomed over the mouth of the hall's long drive. The big iron gates went by on either side of them, beyond which the lines of trees stood, their boughs keeping out the distant neon streetlights. Hallam entered the natural corridor with relief, and he ignored the light switch that could have lit his walk. The darkness would calm his thoughts. He was perhaps halfway up the drive when first the light lamp blinked, then fully illuminated. The rest came on in sequence, obliterating the protective gloom, section by section, until a full curve of the drive was lit, and with it him. He turned and saw Verity standing by the light switch, the left side of her face shining from the lamp beside her. The shadow strangely elongated her face and gave her a wonderful bone structure, a faintly skull-like appearance. Hallam stopped and waited uneasily as she came towards him. He wondered what she had been doing there in the dark, and mentally reprimanded himself for not having been on his guard to sense her presence. Even close up, he could not interpret the expression on her face. He twitched slightly when she reached out and linked an arm with his. "Didn't you go with Lucy, then?" "No." They continued up the drive together, and the inanity of her question unsettling him. When she spoke again, she picked her words carefully, in a confidential manner. "Do you ever think you might take after your mother?" Hallam frowned, but answered honestly, "I can't really tell. I find it difficult to remember her when she was well. I was a bit young." Verity nodded sympathetically. "I think you do take after her." Hallam considered this. "In what way?" "Well, in the sense that you both nurse a special resentment towards me, but I also suppose because you seem to be going the same way as her." "What do you mean?" "Madness isn't necessarily hereditary, of course." "She wasn't mad. She did kill herself, Hallam. I do think that's a little eccentric." Hallam emitted a small puff of laughter out of nervousness. Verity squeezed his arm and smiled at him warmly. "I'm glad you find it funny, Hallam, because I'm sure you contributed to her final decision. You are a horrible, selfish little boy, and there was Lucy, too, of course." "I don't find it funny. She was ill. It was manic depression. Anyway, what do you know?" They continued to walk. The trees drifted by on either side, the soft white light coating their bark like fungus. "When I first saw you, I thought you looked like her," said Verity thoughtfully. "Something furtive and unhappy around the eyes." "I didn't resent you," said Hallam with sudden conviction. And it was true. He vividly remembered when he first saw Verity, and his first impressions were certainly a lot more flattering than hers of him, it seemed, for it was Verity who first opened his eyes to the abstract fascinations of the female body. He was 13 when she had appeared at the door of his father's office. The striking-looking woman had smiled at him, he recalled, but what really struck in his mind was a totally novel impulse that drew his eyes down to her midriff as she passed by and caused him to pay attention to the little valley between her hip bone and belly. Why? He did not know. It was certainly not consciously provoked by Verity. It was a small detail, but a significant shift in his life, and Hallam had rather cherished it, even now, pathetically enough. "Well, that's nice to know," said Verity. The hall came into sight round the site of the last tree. Still holding his arm, she stopped to admire the symmetry of its Queen Anne lines, assisted by the moon, which hung to the left. "Now look at that. Isn't it beautiful?" "Yes, it is," Hallam agreed. Her voice dropped. enjoy it. Hallam's throat contracted and the heat coursed through his body in outrage and excitement. Verity released his arm and calmly resumed her stroll towards the back door. "I'm going in," she said over her shoulder, the softness of her voice reinstalled. A gentle breeze passed through the leaves overhead. He thought that hate must be the most powerful intimacy, free as it was from the restraints that love imposes. It must be nourishing, too. He could not help but admire the swing of Verity's hips as she passed out of sight. Hallam was dozing in bed, exhausted by the evening's events, when he heard Lucy's drunken footsteps coming up the stairs. There was a tap on the door as she entered. She patted his bed so as not to sit on his legs, and then squeezed his knee through the sheets. He could smell the pub on her clothes. "Sorry to barge in," she said, slightly slurred whisper. "That's okay. Was everything all right in the end, then?" "Yeah, fine." There seemed no point in telling her. "What about you?" "I decided I can't face saying goodbye to the cow. I'm off to London now. Just got finished packing. I'll drop the car off at my friend's. It's on permanent loan in exchange for a day's drinking. Then it's Heathrow and an air-frightened hangover to Johannesburg, followed by the meteoric career in the diamond industry, or something like that. You're drunk. Wait till tomorrow." "Don't be rude. I'll drive carefully." "No, you won't. Plus you might get a payoff from Julius. A handy solution to your overdraft." She considered this, sighed, and that triggered an enormous yawn. "Oh, maybe you're right. Night then, sweetie. See you tomorrow." She got up and opened the door, then Hallam remembered. "Lucy, you never told me about Mr. Hennessy flashing at you." "That's because I made it up. But he did look like a flasher, don't you think?" Lucy blew him a kiss and stepped out onto the corridor. With pantomimic exaggeration she checked that the coast was clear before shutting the door behind her. Hallam dropped his head back onto the pillow, dunking it into sleep. The last fading imprint on his conscious mind was an image of white balustrades and stonework glowing in the night, a skeletal outline of the red brick hall.